In Season 2, we get the scoop on how you can build your resume, interview for success, and ultimately advance in your career. This is Inside TechCom with Zohra Mutabana. Let's get started. Today, I'm excited to welcome Jack Molisani. Now, who doesn't know Jack? If you are a tech writer, I'm sure you've heard about him. So, Jack, welcome on the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yes, it's an absolute pleasure. And I'm so looking forward to this conversation with you. And without taking too much away, Jack, please go ahead and introduce yourself. Although you don't need an introduction, but please do.
I'm sure there are plenty of people out there who don't know Jack, no pun intended. I started my career as a project officer in the United States Air Force, and my degree's in computer engineering. And I moved into technical writing and found I liked it and I was good at it. And eventually I started my own company, ProSpring Technical Staffing. We specialize in content professionals. I also published a book called Be the Captain of Your Career that hit number 5 on Amazon's career and resume bestseller list. And finally, your audience might know that I produce a conference on TechCom management called the LavaCon Conference on Content Strategy.
Thank you for that introduction. I definitely want to go back to the book because I used that book and I applied a lot of the strategies that you mentioned when I was recently looking for a job. So if anybody has not looked up that book, please do.
Thank you. The first printing just sold out. So we're doing a second printing. So it's not available on Amazon right now, but I have a few copies left in my office. If anybody wants one, they can shoot me an email or reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Yes, listeners, please do. You will only benefit from it. And I actually found it in my library and I was like, wow, it was very timely. So absolutely. So Jack, this is going to be my second season. And the goal of my second season is to help my audience, be they new entrants to the field, whether they are career changers who are moving from another industry into technical writing, or technical writers who are advancing within the industry. And we are all looking for opportunities, jobs, constantly in our careers. And that is where I thought about, okay, how about I have a second season where we sort of talk about employability? And that is going to be the focus of this season of mine. And what I would like to focus on, building your resume and the interview strategies.
Perfect.
And what is the most important thing in a resume? How important is it, first of all?
Before we talk about what's important in a resume, how about we define what is a resume? Mm-hmm. Because many preconceptions about what resumes are just wrong. A lot of people think your resume is a life history condensed into 2 pages. Some people think it's a capabilities overview. They're not. I have discovered over the years that a resume is just a vehicle that shows that you match what the reader's looking for, or for what the reader's looking for, you grammarians on the line. Mm-hmm. And that's all it is. And anything you put in your resume that gets in the way of the reader finding what they're looking for decreases your chances of getting an interview. So when deciding what should we put in the resume, run it through that filter. Does it show you match what the reader's looking for? Great, keep it in. If it doesn't, take it out or move it to the bottom. So that's the definition we're going to start this conversation based on.
Perfect. I mean, I never thought even about asking that question. And you're so right that we don't pause to think, what is a resume? What is the definition? So that is super, super important.
The first law of technical writing is know thy audience. The same thing applies to resumes.
That's very true.
Now, it's interesting to note that when a company is hiring someone, they're looking for one of 6 things. 1, what are you? Are you a chef? Are you an instructional designer? What are you? 2, how many years experience do you have? Are you entry level? Have you been around for 20 years? How senior are you? 3, do you have experience in my industry? Biotech companies want writers with a biotech background. Same thing with software companies. 4, do you have the tools we use here? Now, if it's a full-time staff position, maybe they'll train you on the authoring tools. But if it's a contract where you have to get in, get done, get out, you need to have those tools already. 5, do you have a degree in an applicable field? Because many companies still require you to have a degree in something. And 6, can I afford you? And the number 6 is the only thing not covered in your resume.
Many, many years ago, when I was applying for a job, I remember on my resume mentioning what I can expect. Have you encountered that anywhere else?
It's interesting that you asked that. And there's a balance between stating an objective and doing a summary. If we refer back to what the reader's looking for, let's take an example. Say I was looking for a technical writer who's written nuclear regulatory documentation with a degree in applicable fields, been doing this at least 5 years. If I got a resume and it says, summary, technical writer with 5+ years experience writing nuclear regulatory documentation with a degree in nuclear physics, I would stop reading right there and pick up the phone going, where did you do that? Come in for an interview, because you just explained in one sentence that you match what I was looking for. Now, compare that to an objective that says, I'm looking for a company who will nurture me as an individual where I can have fun and get a paycheck. No. It's not about you. It's not what the company can do for you. Mm-hmm. It's what you can do for the company.
So that begs the question, on my resume, mm-hmm. would I be putting an objective or a summary? Because what I'm hearing more and more, at least what I'm reading online, is that you need to have an objective and not a summary. And now that you have sort of brought out this difference, what should I have there then?
Excellent question. And it depends on where the resume is and who's reading it. Huh. If you're uploading your resume to monster.com or dice.com or even your own personal website, you don't know what the reader's looking for. So you can't tailor your summary to what they're looking for. So in this case, if you're looking for a senior UX writer position on a leading mobile app company, that's okay. You're not a ditch digger. I'm not going to call you. So in that circumstance, yes, that objective is perfect.
Okay.
However, if you're applying for a very specific job, they're going to want to see how you match that job. So in that case, I would change it to a summary and not an objective. Because if you're applying for the job, clearly that's the job you want and you applied for it.
That's a very important distinction. I have never thought about it that way. And I have made the mistake of putting an objective, not a summary. So it's important.
I have to tell you, one of my favorite sayings is the definition of an expert is someone who's made all the mistakes possible in a given field, assuming you don't keep repeating them. So every time you try something, you either succeeded or you learned something.
Right. I didn't even know that I'd learned something, but that probably explains why when I was applying pointedly to a company in a targeted manner, the objective is what probably turned my chances away rather than getting me that foot in the door.
Possible.
I'm just thinking aloud. So that's something for a good reminder for us, especially when we are working on our resume, we are branding ourselves and we are marketing ourselves. These are important strategies that we should be focusing on, and knowing this difference is absolutely important, no matter which field you belong to.
Correct. Now, another thing I tell people is as communication professionals, we should be applying the same usability standards to our resume that we do any documentation or training material. We should also do usability testing. Mm-hmm. So if you don't know, should I do an objective or say a summary, do 2 versions and do A/B testing. Show it to someone, go, which one of these better communicates that I'm a fit for this job? Which one of these makes you want to talk to me more? So don't take my opinion for it or your opinion. Do your usability testing. People say, oh, here's a yes and for you before we end the sentence. The biggest question I get from candidates is how long should my resume be? And there are more opinions out there than you can shake a stick at. Remember, my definition, let's do a little exercise here. It's very easy. My definition of a resume is just a vehicle that shows that you match what I'm looking for. Mm-hmm. Given that definition, how long should your resume be?
No more than 2 pages.
If a resume is a vehicle that shows that you match what I'm looking for,
probably just those first 3 sentences.
Long enough to show that you match what I'm looking for. If you can do it in half a page, do it in half a page. If it takes 3 pages, take 3 pages. But you have to show that, I mean, if everything in your resume and I go, yes, oh, absolutely, yes, we need that. I mean, it could be 12 pages. Well, 12 pages is an exaggeration. But as long as you're showing that your skill set can help solve that company's problems, I don't care if it's 2 pages. I don't care if it's 3 pages. Just make it long enough to show that you match what the reader's looking for.
Interesting. So you're saying that, and I think I'm processing this for myself. One, going back to the usability testing, Who should I be doing that A/B testing with? I think that is important as well, right? Because if I'm doing that A/B testing with somebody who is not familiar with my field, especially a discipline that is so niche, what are your thoughts on that?
I forget the name of the artist, but I read an interview on a Chinese poet one time, and he would take his poetry down to the woman who washes clothes at the edge of the river. She said if she understood it, everybody would understand it, right? So clearly there are terms that we use in our industry, right?
Right.
That your neighbor would not understand, but they should be able to understand your objective. They should be able to skim the years at each of your jobs. They should be able to pick out the titles of where you worked without that being embedded somewhere in a sea of 23 lines of uninterrupted text, right?
Right.
It's, yes, give it to like a hiring manager. Okay. So this is going to be a secret just between us and probably 20,000 other people. When I was working as a tech writer in Orange County, I picked out 5 companies that I wanted to work at. I was a contractor. I was at the time the president of the Orange County STC chapter. So I called the documentation managers at every one of those companies and said, I'm writing an article for my STC newsletter. May I interview you on trends in hiring and technical communication? Everyone said yes. So I asked, what are you looking for? What kind of position? When are you going to be hiring? What level of technical writing? What tools do you use? By the end of that, I knew exactly what everybody in Orange County was looking for, when they were looking for it. And then I said, would you like a copy of the article once it's written? I did write it. And I said, oh, you would? Okay. What's your email address? I now have a personal introduction, personal, not applying for a job through a website or sending your resume to blackholesnevertobeheardfromagain.com. That's another way of knowing your audience. So that's a tip. Anybody can do that. So
that's brilliant. How easy was it? I mean, you were an STC president, the chapter president, and that sort of probably gave you some credibility. If I were not that and I tried to get that information, would that be possible?
There is a, I believe, Yiddish term called chutzpah, meaning brazenness. Say you don't have the street creds I do. And you say, hi, I'm writing an article for my STC newsletter. May I interview you? They're going to tell you one of two things, sure or no. Oh, I hate to go off on tangents, but this answers your question beautifully.
Please do.
As a recruiter, I keep a log of how many people I have to call before on average I get a job to fill, right? And it varies over time, but it's usually about 30, whether it's a cold call to a company I've never met before or somebody I've met at a conference, and on average 30 calls. So if I call someone and said, hi, do you have a job to fill? And they say, no, I go, great. I only need 29 more no's. I need 29 no's because I know on average the 30th is going to be a yes. So tell me no, please. I need the no. Come on, give me the no's. Give me the no's.
No.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Same thing with asking somebody for a job or for an interview or for an interview. Just ask.
Okay. So, I mean, basically, you've not lost anything, but taking that first step, right. After the 29 no's, you will get that 30th yes. We talked about the objective, and beautifully you articulated what the difference is between an objective and a summary. Now, I want to sort of go a little deeper because that objective is the crux of your resume. That is your USP, so to speak, your unique selling point.
Thank you.
I should know better, right? I should be explaining my acronyms. So if somebody is applying, if somebody's new versus somebody who's advancing, would there be a difference, be it a summary or an objective, or would the rules be the same?
Yes, to both your questions. Clearly, if you're an entry-level technical writer and you've just finished, say, a certificate in technical writing, you don't have a lot of experience to summarize. So clearly, your objective in this is an objective. I'm looking for an entry or junior level technical writing position where I can use my background in life sciences. Speaking of which, people often ask me if I should go back and get like a master's in technical writing. That's like, well, you're writing about writing? No, get that domain knowledge. Get a certificate in network engineering or database administration or cytology, and then a certificate in tech writing. And that way you have both the experience and the domain knowledge and the education. But I digress.
That is actually very important. I think that is something that, in my personal experience, interviewed young technical writers who have that writing experience but don't have that domain expertise. And it's hard for us on the hiring side what do we do? Because do they show the mindset to grasp that technology? So having some domain expertise will help me know that, okay, they've made an attempt.
Correct. The one thing we haven't talked about yet that is probably a good segue at this point is how do you get experience if you don't have experience, but you can't get experience unless you have experience.
And actually, that was my follow-up question. Please dive right in.
So especially if we talked about migrating from one career into TechCom or some other content field if you're not there already. There's this weird phenomenon that I've noticed that no matter what companies are looking for, they want you to be doing it now, not 20 years ago, not I've never done this before. So especially if you've been laid off, there's also a perception that if you've been laid off for 6 months, this must be something wrong with you. Otherwise, you would have been hired by now. And we tend to wonder, what have you been doing for 6 months? Sitting home, watching TV, eating Del Monte clean peaches and heavy syrup? So what you can do is go out and volunteer somewhere. Go to Habitat for Humanity and say, do you have any instructions you need documented? Do you have any safety protocols you need documented? Go to Save the Bay and say, do you have any press releases you need written? And then you can say, from June 2021 to present, independent contractor working on projects such as, or for clients such as. You never mentioned that you worked for donuts and coffee, but nobody says how much they make in their resume. So you don't need to tell them that, but it shows that you're proactive. It shows you've got experience. It shows that you're learning. Here's another secret. Most of the authoring tools, you can download a free 30-day trial. So download that free trial, learn the heck out of that tool, create 150 copies or pages that you can put in your portfolio because it shows ambition. It shows initiative. And I'll tell you, I'll take somebody with initiative over someone who's boring and dull, but knows the tools.
Absolutely. I mean, everything that you have said is so, you hit it out of the ballpark there. And these are things that we are constantly thinking about, but then these don't come to us readily. You're frozen once you've lost your job. You just don't know what your next step should be. So this, again, allows you to think out of the box. And probably this is more applicable to our field where there are opportunities out there for writing and you just have to find that. And if you can do it pro bono and just build up your portfolio, this would be a great way to do it.
Another small tidbit that's probably a good fit at this point is we mentioned tools, right?
Right.
I was interviewing for a contract once, and one of the things that they wanted was experience with conditional text in FrameMaker. For example, the Ford Probe and the Mazda 626 were the exact same car with different names. So it was the same user manual. So Ford would change the name to Probe and Mazda would call it 626 and print the user manual. And you do that with like a variable in FrameMaker. I got a copy of FrameMaker and I taught myself how do you do conditional text. And then because our STC connections, I said, anybody who wants to learn this, meet me at Starbucks on Saturday, bring your laptop. And I taught everybody how to do conditional text. And then I went on the interview. And when the manager asked me, can you do conditional text? I go, do conditional text? I've taught conditional text and got the contract. But again, it showed initiative. And if I don't know it, I'll go out and learn it. I'll tell you, one of the most defining career-changing moments of my life is when I was growing up in high school, they had what we called a Sadie Hawkins dance, where the women of the school asked the men to dance, not the other way around. And I remember, or it was some sort of dance, and I remember no one was asking me to dance. And I went, screw it. I'm going to ask somebody. What's the worst they're going to say? No. They've already said no, or I'm already not dancing. What I'm going to do, not dance more? And I realized in that moment that I'm never going to get anything unless I ask for it. You're not going to get a raise unless you ask for it. You're not going to get a new job unless you ask for it. And asking is kind of scary, but it gets easier with practice.
True.
Which reminds me that for practice, I tell everybody two things. Learn how to do public speaking at Toastmasters. It's a very safe place to learn speaking. And two, take an improv comedy class, because improv teaches you to be in the moment and not be thrown off by anything you didn't expect. So if your boss asks you a question you weren't expecting, if an interviewer asks you a question you weren't expecting, you don't sit there going, I don't know. You listen and you add to that question. So those two things, again, one of those nuggets that you can take away from this podcast is Toastmasters and improv.
I've definitely heard of Toastmasters, but I haven't heard of the improv.
There's just so many great ideas bouncing back and forth that it's hard to pick one. The public speaking, and we started off talking about how you entry level, but what about the mid-level tech writer, or you want to advance your career?
Mm-hmm.
I had a job opening once for a documentation manager or a senior tech writer, and I knew the director of this company, and she wanted someone very forward-looking. A lot of changes were coming down the pipe in TechCom, a lot of changes in publishing technologies, and I had this candidate, for all purposes, looked like a good match. So I did an internet search on her name and got 0 hits. 0. Not an article, not speaking at a conference, not a volunteer at her STC chapter, nothing. And I knew this company wouldn't like this candidate because there was no initiative. Now, someone did point out maybe she recently got married and changed her name, but still there should be some paper trail, some breadcrumb there. So write articles for your newsletter, speak at conferences, teach a Saturday workshop on conditional text. One, if I go looking for someone, I'll find you on the internet, preferably you not drinking beer from a bong on a beach in Mazatlan, but professionally, be visible. And I'll tell you, for a long time, I had a column in the SDC Intercom magazine. 2 guesses how I got that column.
No idea.
I said, hey, Liz Poland, the editor at the time, can I have a column? She goes, sure. What do you want to write about? How about job hunting? She goes, great.
Oh.
That's how hard it was.
So you asked for it.
I asked. See, getting back to our asking.
Got it. Even you talked about you went looking for this candidate online. And I think this is a relevant to our conversation here. When you find something professionally positive, it works in their favor. What happens as a recruiter if you find something negative about a candidate? Does that hamper their chances?
Oh, absolutely. And I'll just give you a few examples. The most common mistake I see in resumes is a mix of en dashes and hyphens and date ranges. If you do in Microsoft Word, which most people use, space hyphen space, it turns it into an en dash for you.
Mm-hmm.
If you do space hyphen up arrow, it does not. So over time, you lose track and you don't read from top to bottom. And sometimes there are spaces before and after the hyphen, and sometimes they're not. Oh, that'll kill you. I used to say that engineers can get away with typos, but tech writers cannot. And I don't even believe that anymore. I had a manager once tell me, it was about a female candidate. He said, if she can't write 2 pages of error-free resume, how can I possibly expect her to write 20,000 lines of error-free code? Print it out and give it to your neighbor to proofread.
Proofread. Yes. That usability testing that we're talking about.
Yes. Again, coming back to our definition of a resume, is I can tell instantly if someone else has written your resume. That resume should be the first sample of your writing ability. And if you have someone else write it, it's like you're a writer. You can't write your own resume. And we're not going to do a whole podcast on applicant tracking systems. But if you are applying through a job through a website, which I discourage, get a personal introduction, that resume has to show that you match that resume almost perfectly. So the example I used the last time I did a workshop on this was, if the requirements is experience writing training materials, your resume should say experience writing training materials. Not, as a member of a team that valued my contributions, I interviewed subject matter experts and other professionals to write standard operating procedures, user manuals, and training materials. A human and an AI won't parse that. Wrote training materials. Keep it simple.
So Jack, the question that comes to my mind is, we talked about experience when you're applying. As a new entrant, somebody who's new to the field, the job descriptions out there, and I've seen a lot of discussions about this, especially on LinkedIn, they're looking for a junior technical writer, but they're looking for somebody with X number of years of experience. How does an applicant overcome that? Like we talked about, your objective is going to be an objective. It's not going to be a summary because you don't have that experience to summarize. What is your take on that?
I know many managers who will hire someone based on enthusiasm more than experience. All right. Which you can't show when applying for a job online. Now, I believe you said at the top before we started that you are president of your STC chapter.
That's right.
As am I. I'm president of San Diego chapter. I'm visible, as you are. A story I like to tell is in the Orange County chapter, there was a civil engineer, Teresa Vigienes, who wanted to move into TechCom, didn't have any experience. She volunteered to be their newsletter editor. Somebody found a newsletter she wrote and edited, liked it so much they offered her a job. So the best way to get a job is not to apply for one. It's for someone to ask you, will you come work for me? Right?
Right.
Teach a class to your STC. I love STC. It's the Society for Technical Communication for anybody who's not a member. STC.org. You will get far more out of it than what they charge for dues. But that's your networking. That's building your network. That's meeting your TechCom peeps. There are people I know personally. If I say, oh, I need a documentation manager in Milwaukee, Molly Barrett, because I know Molly through the STC. Documentation marketing manager in San Diego, Bonnie Graham. So the best way to get a job and to answer your question, if you're entry level, is to be so visible and enthusiastic and make things happen that it doesn't matter that you've not done this for 2 years or 1 year. That's a little vague answer to your question, but I think it's a very valid answer.
Yeah. And I think it is definitely valid, no doubt. But I'm applying your answer to somebody who has worked in some other capacity. But I'm thinking more, and the reason I asked this question and I want to focus on it is I have worked with we mentor, our chapter mentors students who are trying to break into the field. And they have struggled because of this tendencies of companies, of hiring managers to have a job description that is looking for the world in a candidate that is new to the field. I'm trying to help these students because they are the future of our generation. And I feel passionately about this. And I want to make sure that how do they overcome this challenge? Because somebody in my chapter took them 6 months to find a break.
Sure.
And they're doing everything right. They're networking, they're doing everything for a chapter, but yet it took them that long to find a job because of this very tendency of hiring managers to have this outworldly expectation. I'm sorry, I feel personally about it.
I'm absolutely tracking with you. Us recruiters call that a unicorn. Yeah, you want a junior level person with 30 years experience and willing to work for $10 an hour with 10 years of experience with FrameMaker and nuclear regulatory documentation. No, that person doesn't exist. Kevin Medlick, my chief operations recruiter, calls that a purple squirrel. Yeah, I'm searching for a purple squirrel. When interviewing, when applying for a job, I always ask, what are you looking for? Okay, of this laundry list of things that you're looking for, which one's most important? What are you interviewing that you haven't found yet? Especially if you can get that personal referral like we spoke about earlier and not applying through a website where you're filling out a form. And here's a very example that your entry-level person can learn from. That I wanted an interview once and I asked the recruiter, what are you looking for? Because I wanted to show I had it. And they went, somebody with diplomacy skills. I went, retro. Apparently that company had a lot of brilliant scientists who all thought they were the top dog and they would give conflicting information. So the writer's job was more like conflict resolution than tech writing. They needed someone with people skills, and that was nowhere in the job description. Nowhere. Huh. Unless I had asked, I wouldn't have known that. So your entry-level person can say that, yeah, I see you're looking for this. I have a technical writing certificate program, and I took nuclear regulatory classes at college and had a ball. Can we talk a little bit about what you're looking for? Again, it's me asking. Granted, I am the poster child for type A personality. Granted, but I always wasn't like this. I took technical writing, public speaking classes. I took improv classes, and I have to tell you, this is a secret. Only a few people, now many people know this, puppy, because I wrote an article. I got laid off in the mid-90s and could not find work as an engineer. So a friend of mine had a company selling Ginsu knives in home and garden shows. I was broke, so I took the gig and had a blast. And I learned how to ask for the sale. I learned how to project my voice. I learned how to handle hecklers. Who knew that learning how to demonstrate a Ginsu knife would advance my career? So again, getting back to your entry-level person, there's all these facets that you can employ other than having those 5 years experience. What you mentioned earlier about being creative about your job search.
Yes. First of all, I own these knives, this particular brand, and I've always struggled with the brand, so I don't want to butcher it. But I have
no pun intended.
No pun intended. No, no. But yeah, you're right. And we are not born A-type personalities. And you found creative ways to discover and to grow your skill set, right? We are always growing. We are always a work in progress. I tend to sometimes get philosophical in our conversations, but I think what you're bringing to the fore is that anything that you do translates into a skill and your marketability.
Agreed.
Awesome. We've talked a lot about the resume here, Jack. Are there any other suggestions?
First of all, we talked about tools earlier.
Yes.
Tools do not make a good writer, but there's nothing worse than not getting a job because another person had the tool and you didn't. So especially if you're between jobs, use this time, learn that tool, teach it to others. You can use that trick about, hey, not only have I used this, I've taught it. We talked about getting experience anywhere you can, volunteerism. It's the simple things. Keep the resume short, show how you match. Here's another example. If someone say a recruiter is searching for a technical writer in South Texas with FrameMaker experience, and you don't have FrameMaker experience, but you post your resume saying, I have PageMaker, a page layout tool similar to FrameMaker. Well, guess what? Your resume is going to come up in that search. It's a truthful statement. I never said I had FrameMaker. I said I had PageMaker similar to FrameMaker. Or I took a class in FrameMaker. I taught conditional text in FrameMaker, and you make that word FrameMaker show up 17 times in that resume using truthful statements, never a lie, because it'll always come back. That's another way someone entry level or transitioning from one career to another can make sure you at least come up in the resume search, which is the first barrier. And again, you want someone to ask you to work for them, not beg them to offer you a job.
Right. The one question that I had on my list was, what advice would you give to candidates, like what to avoid in the resume? And one thing that you mentioned was typos, of course. But other than that, what are some things that are a turnoff? Be a recruiter or a hiring manager, no matter what your position, what are some other turnoffs in a resume that you would recommend that they avoid?
There is nothing worse than getting a resume with 12 to 14 bullets, way too many to begin with, and then they don't put any space between the bullet. So even if you hold your finger up to the resume, all you see is a half page of uninterrupted text. You should be applying the same human factors to your resume. Wide margins, white space above your headings, space between your bullets, short bullets. You are writing for short attention span theater. Training guides. Yeah. And then I advise everybody to send their resume in PDF format, because if you send me a Word file, I can turn on hidden characters and see that instead of putting a tab stop and using one tab to get your date range on the right hand side, you went tab, 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 space, 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 space. Clearly does not know the tool. Everything's written in normal, no styles. Now, again, yeah, that is a sample of your writing work. Show off how good you are. Oh, here's another thing to add. That
please do.
Especially for the people who don't have 20 years experience. I expect you to be an expert in your field to the level to which you've been trained. If you took a certificate in tech writing, I don't expect you to be able to do documentation plans and multi-channel publishing, but you should be an expert at numbered and bulleted lists, right? You should be an expert in how to do something 1, 2, 3. Be an expert entry-level tech writer.
Gotcha.
Right? Same thing. No matter where you are in your career, be an expert. Position yourself. Ooh, this is another thing you can do. And then I'll shut up and let you talk for a while.
No, please go ahead. Keep going.
It's no longer called this, but there used to be a conference on how to write online help called Win Writers. And I knew the person who produced it. And there was a panel discussion on WinZip that you use to compress files has the worst online help in the history of man. Just the worst. So this panel discussion decided to uncompile the WinHelp, fix it, and then each panelist is going to show what they fixed and why. And these were the leaders in their industry. Joe Walensky, Scott Pagan, who wrote How to Write Online Help, Cheryl Lubeck. So I said, again, I said, hey, Joe, can I be on that panel? He said, sure. Here I am. Nobody knew me at this point in my career. I'm sitting on the same panel as Scott Pagan and Joe Walensky. And you know how I got there? I asked, right? Suddenly, I'm an online help expert because I just spoke at a conference sitting next to Joe Walensky, right? Again, I did a great job decompiling that help and fixing it. And I was able to articulate why it was good. So I wasn't misrepresenting myself. There's a thing right now called where people they're afraid that they're misrepresenting themselves. It's not
imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome. Yeah. Well, if you try to BS your way onto a panel discussion and die, well, clearly that's imposter syndrome. But I'm talking about be an expert level to what you've been trained and then get out there and show people.
Makes sense.
Now, yeah. I mean, write that article. Newsletter editors are hungry for content. Blogs are hungry for content. Podcasters are hungry for interviewees if you have something to say. All right. So the first thing is have something to say.
Yes.
And then find somebody who will listen to you. And it's your job to find them, not for them to find you. Okay, back to you.
All true. I mean, first of all, as you were talking about Joe Walensky, he gave me a break at Writers UX. That was my first conference presentation. And I owe my big thank you to him, because had he not given me that platform.
And I'll tell you, I produce a conference, the LavaCon conference. I do the same thing. A lot of conferences, well, how many years have you spoken at conferences? And I go, you never spoke at a conference? Come on. Now, I will coach you. I'm going to want to see your slides. We're going to do a dry run, right? So, but that's one of, how do I phrase this? I believe that those of us who've been around a while, have a little gray in our temples, have an obligation to mentor the next generation of writers. Somebody gave us our break. Someone gave you your break. Someone gave me my break. And it's up to us to pay it forward, pay it back.
And I'm so glad that you mentioned this, Jack, because there are many amongst us who do not know, first of all, we have this imposter syndrome. I'm not good enough. I can't do this. And to know that there is a platform where you will be given a chance and where you will be coached and you will be mentored. That's important for it to come out. So thank you for mentioning that. And I will make sure that I put that in the show notes.
I did speed networking at my conference one year. All you had to do is sit down at a table prior to COVID, hand your business card to someone and go, hi, I'm Joe Jones. I'm a tech writer at IBM. Next. I so traumatized the introverts, making them do that they wanted a quiet room with puppies to recover in. So each year now we have a quiet room with therapy dogs just so the introverts can recharge their batteries.
Is that a true story?
That's a true story. Absolutely true story. Swear to God. Granted, it's harder for an introvert to be out there, but there are techniques for getting around that. So, okay, just say for the next hour and a half, I'm going to be an extrovert. And when I'm done, I'll go home and recharge my batteries. So be a introverted extrovert or extroverted introvert. But again, if you just want to sit in a dark room and write, there are jobs out there like that. But the point of this podcast is being causative over your job search, over your career. Yeah, especially these days, you just can't wait for someone to give you a job.
This actually takes me back to the title of your book, Be the Captain of Your Career. Right? Yeah, and to do that, you have to take control.
Yeah.
You will not be the captain of your ship if you don't take charge. And you have to put yourself out there for that.
All right. So you brought up ships, and I'm going to see your ships and raise you one in a very good sort of way.
Okay.
One of my favorite writers is a woman named Chellie Campbell, Chellie, Chellie.com, who wrote a book called The Wealthy Spirit. Have you heard the expression, when my ship comes in?
I've heard of it, but I don't know what it means.
Okay. So when they discovered the New World, America, merchants in London would mortgage everything they had to build a ship, outfit it with a crew, and send it off to the New World. When it came back, if it came back, because there were mutinies and whirlpools, they would be rich beyond their imagination. The problem is there was no ship-to-shore radios back then. There was no radar. So they would literally be waiting for their ship to come in. Now, I have to tell you, I know plenty of people who are waiting for their ship to come in, but they're not sending any out. You have to send out ships if you want your ship to come in. You have to write that newsletter article. You have to network at meetings. You have to go to that conference. You have to speak at that conference, which is why I know that I have to make about 30 calls before I get it. Thing is, you and I were just at a conference earlier this week where I spoke, and I had somebody in my session go, by the way, I need to hire a technical writer. I'm going to introduce you to my boss. That wasn't me cold calling them. That was just me being visible and being competent in what I do. The same thing holds true for your audience.
Very true. Very true. And I was one of the attendees, by the way, Jack. And also a lesson to me is that no matter what you're doing, whether you are looking for a job as a writer or somebody in your shoes who's a recruiter, you still have to be visible. You have to put your ships out there. Beautifully said. I love that analogy. Thank you. One last question about the resumes. And that is, we've touched upon a lot of things and the functional versus the chronological. And I sort of know when to use that. But can you sort of share from your perspective when to use which format?
Absolutely. If you're applying for a full-time staff position at a very well-established company, they're probably going to want to see job retention, not you jumping around from job to job. So that chronology format is very important. If you're a contractor, I really don't care how long you were at XYZ company. I just want to know what you did, right? So if you've been an independent contractor from 1999 to present, working at companies such as, then you list them in the order that they apply. If this is a consumer electronic documentation project, I list my experience at Canon, Epson, etc. If it's a programming documentation project, I list all my API documentation, application program interface documentation. So that's one difference. The second difference is, say you're applying for a job and you've got the experience they're looking for, but it was 10 years ago. They probably won't read that far back. So before you start your chronology, you do a little functional section going 10 plus years doing nuclear regulatory documentation, 5 plus years with FrameMaker, and excellent interview and conflict resolution skills. That way they don't have to read all the way to page 2 to see where you did that. It's right there up front.
You can blend the formats.
Yes, absolutely.
I never thought
I do. I did at my resume. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, wow. That is an amazing secret that you're sharing because I've not seen that in my many, many years of this long career. Every time I'm talking to my guests, they have such amazing nuggets to share.
I'll tell you, I have learned things in sessions I've given because between all the collective knowledge in the room, I can't possibly have made every mistake possible or tried every scenario where they go, ooh, we tried that and we learned this. I went, ooh, that's good. Write that down. So absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
I have a running sheet here with everything that you've shared with us. Hey, Jack, we've had some great conversations about how to build your resume. Thanks for all the advice you've shared with us.
Absolutely my pleasure. And I invite all your listeners to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Jack Molisani on there. And you never know when you might be able to use that connection on a future job search.
Thank you. And you also wanted to mention about the LavaCon.
Oh, that's right. We have a discount code for your listeners. Lavacon.org is the website for the conference. And if anybody wants to attend, they can register using the referral code hashtag InsideTechCom with 2 M's for $200 off conference tuition. We're virtual this year.
Awesome. And when is the conference?
Again? October 24th through 27th.
Awesome. And I'll make sure to include this in the show notes. Thank you so very much, Jack. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Subscribe to the podcast on your favorite app, including Apple, Google, or Spotify. Follow me on LinkedIn or visit us at www.insidetechcom.show for the latest updates. Catch you on another episode.